He defied surrender. He stood alone when the world fell silent. This is the story of Charles de Gaulle, the man who refused to let France and built it back stronger than ever. The government has surrendered. The army is in shambles. For most, the war is over. Hope is a distant memory. But from a small radio studio in London, a voice crackles through the airwaves, a voice of defiance. A tall, little-known general named Charles de Gaulle declares, "Whatever happens, the flame of the French resistance must not be extinguished and will not be extinguished." This was the appeal of June 18th, a moment that would change the course of history. But who was this man who dared to challenge the inevitable? Born in 1890, Charles de Gaulle was a product of a deeply patriotic and Catholic family. From a young age, he was fascinated by military history and dreamed of serving France. He graduated from the prestigious St. Cyr Military Academy and plunged headfirst into the brutal trenches of World War I. He was wounded 3 times and taken prisoner. Even attempting to escape 5 times, his courage was undeniable. But so was his stubbornness and his sharp, often critical, intellect. During the interwar years, de Gaulle became a military theorist. He saw the future of warfare not in static trenches, but in fast-moving armored divisions, the very tactics the Germans would later use to crush France. He wrote books and pleaded with the high command, but his visionary ideas were largely ignored by the conservative military establishment. They saw him as arrogant, an outsider who didn't play by the rules. They were right about one thing. De Gaulle never cared for rules that stood in the way of what he believed was right for France. When the invasion came in 1940, de Gaulle, now a brigadier general, was one of the few commanders to achieve any success against the German panzers. But it was too little, too late. As the French government prepared to sign an armistice, de Gaulle made a fateful decision. He fled to London with almost nothing but the conviction that he, and he alone, embodied the true fighting spirit of France. From London, he began the monumental task of building the Free French forces from scratch. Initially, he was a leader with no army and no country. Winston Churchill famously said of him, "The cross of Lorraine was the heaviest cross I had to bear," referring to de Gaulle's symbol and his famously difficult personality. He clashed with the British, with the Americans, and with anyone who he felt did not give France the respect it deserved. He was demanding, proud, and utterly because to him, he wasn't just a general. He was the living symbol of a sovereign France. To compromise on his own dignity was to compromise on the dignity of his nation. Slowly but surely, his radio broadcasts rallied support. Resistance networks sprang up across occupied France. Inspired by his voice, French colonies rallied to his cause, providing soldiers and resources. The Free French forces grew, fighting alongside the Allies in North Africa, in Italy, and finally, on the beaches of Normandy. De Gaulle insisted that a French division, the 2nd Armored Division under General Leclerc, be the first Allied unit to enter the liberated capital. On August 25, 1944, Charles de Gaulle walked down the Champs-Élysées surrounded by a jubilant, weeping Parisian crowd. It was his ultimate vindication. The man who had been sentenced to death in absentia by the collaborationist Vichy regime returned as the undisputed leader of a liberated France. He had kept the flame alive. After the war, de Gaulle led the provisional government, granting women the right to vote and laying the groundwork for France's social security system. But he soon grew frustrated with the petty squabbling of political parties in the new Fourth Republic. Believing it was too weak to lead France effectively, he resigned in 1946 and retired to his country home in Colombie, seemingly to fade into history. He spent the next 12 years writing his magnificent war memoirs, a literary masterpiece that cemented his own legend. But France would call on him again. By 1958, the country was on the brink of civil war over the brutal colonial conflict in Algeria. The Fourth Republic was in the crisis, the nation turned to the one man they believed could save them, de Gaulle. He returned to power, but on his own terms. He demanded a new constitution, one that would create a strong presidency capable of decisive leadership. This was the birth of the Fifth Republic, the political system France still has today. As president, de Gaulle's actions were as bold and controversial As ever, he made the painful but necessary decision to grant Algeria independence, ending a bloody war but enraging many in the military and colonial establishment who had helped bring him to power. He survived multiple assassination attempts by those who saw it as a betrayal. On the world stage, he pursued a policy of national independence. He pulled France out of NATO's integrated military command, developed France's own nuclear deterrent, and twice vetoed Britain's entry into the European Economic Community. He wanted France to lead a strong, independent Europe, a third force that was not beholden to either the United States or the Soviet Union. To his critics, he was an obstructionist nationalist. To his supporters, he was a pragmatist, securing France's place as a major world power. His presidency was a time of great economic modernization and cultural change, but it ended in turmoil. In May 1968, massive student protests and worker strikes erupted across France, challenging his authority and traditional values. While he weathered the storm, the events marked a clear shift in French society. A year later, after losing a referendum on government reform, he did something few leaders of his stature ever do. He quietly resigned. He went back to his village and never spoke publicly about politics again. He died the following year in 1970. Charles de Gaulle was a complex and often contradictory figure. He was an arch-conservative who enacted progressive social reforms, a military man who ended a colonial war, a fierce nationalist who envisioned a united Europe. He was difficult, autocratic, and possessed an unshakable belief in his own destiny. But through it all, his one guiding star was France. He rescued his country's honor in 1940, restored its state in 1944, and saved it from civil war in 1958. Hero, leader, legend, whatever you call him, one thing is certain: modern France is unimaginable without Charles de Gaulle. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into history as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. Let us know in the comments what historical figure you'd like to see covered next. Until then, stay curious.